Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shores, send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
Xenophobia, a deep-rooted irrational fear of immigrants, a prominent issue in American culture and society since Columbus. In spite of the fact that the U.S. is deemed the land of the free and thought to be a place of equal opportunity for all, American culture is ever selective of who we let into the fold. An increase in cautious acceptance of people entering the U.S. is both evident now and throughout American history.
Although the United States has attempted to make progress combating xenophobia, anti-immigrant acts such as the post-9/11 reaction, Japanese internment, the Red Scare, and the Chinese Exclusion Act has influenced xenophobia today.
Many were shocked when in 2016, Donald Trump rose to fame through his harsh statements on immigration. His campaign promises, which boasted xenophobic remarks such as a wall between the U.S. and Mexico and a Muslim ban, shocked some but also appealed to many.
Patriotic American Muslims with undivided loyalty to our country. Like many immigrants, we came to this country empty-handed. We believed in American democracy, that with hard work and goodness of this country, we could share in and contribute to its blessings. Let me ask you, have you even read the United States Constitution? Look for the words liberty and equal protection of law.
In January 2017, Trump was inaugurated and immediately initiated Executive Order 13769, also known as Trump's travel ban. The ban called for the restriction of travel into the U.S. of citizens from Iraq, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen for 90 days, and Syria indefinitely. It also halted refugee resettlement in order to control the flow of Syrian immigrants into America. The executive order attempts to explain the reason for the ban. These are countries that have already been identified as presenting heightened concerns about terrorism and travel to the U.S. Additionally, members of Congress have expressed concerns about screening and vetting procedures following the recent terrorist attacks in this country and in Europe.
After many recent terrorist attacks in Europe, there has become a heightened fear of attacks in America from Muslims, even though there are more terror plots against the U.S. from U.S. citizens than any other country. However, Americans' perception of the identity of terrorists are ingrained in our society.
A criminal act performed by a white man is never associated with his religion or race. So why do we automatically assume someone with a Middle Eastern name who practices Islam is a terrorist? People have blurred the lines between Muslim extremists and everyday Muslims.
Trump fuels the xenophobic idea of who America's enemies are. By instating the travel ban, he reinforces the concept that all terrorists are Middle Eastern and Muslim. Although the travel ban was repealed under review, support for the ban continued as Trump relentlessly propagandized the need for extreme vetting.
Trump's response to the temporary repeal of the travel ban further revealed his xenophobic views, stating, "The best way to keep foreign terrorists, or as some people would say in certain instances, radical Islamic terrorists, from attacking our country is to stop them from entering our country in the first place." Furthermore, by connecting terrorism and Islam, Trump is cementing awareness among people which causes an irrational fear of immigrants.
How did this irrational fear come about?
Most people in America remember the day they heard about the bombing at the Twin Towers. Deemed 9/11, the devastating event had lasting effects in society and marked a turning point in the treatment of Muslims and Middle Easterners in America and around the world. Due to the public's reaction to the information release pointing the finger towards Al-Qaeda, Muslims were hit with the greatest rise in hate crimes in the history of Muslims in America. The stigma connecting Muslims and terrorism was cemented after 9/11, and its lasting effects are etched in today's policies and social norms. The social profiling of religion in correlation with the actions of a small yet powerful group has scarred a whole group of people into a box of cemented stereotypes. In doing so, the public wanted an easy target to blame and pointed the finger towards a religion, furthering the rise of hate crimes.
Although there have always been hate crimes against Muslims in the U.S., after 9/11, Muslim Americans were particularly targeted.
The government also made acts and laws that could be used to unfairly target people of certain countries or religions. The USA Patriot Act gave the government the power to increase surveillance and investigative powers. By allowing surveillance without warrants, it gave the government the power to racially profile Middle Easterners. Another act that increased the powers of the government was NSEERS, the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System. NSEERS required people from certain countries to register and continually check in with immigration officers. If people failed to report to immigration, they could be deported or arrested. 24 out of 25 countries of origin that were required to register were predominantly Muslim countries.
With my signature, this law will give intelligence and law enforcement officials important new tools to fight a present danger.
The NSEERS was enacted as part of the War on Terrorism. It emphasized the control of immigration in order to combat terrorism. Terrorist attacks have claimed the lives of thousands of Americans. As a result, new regulations have gone into effect to help ensure the safety of all persons in the United States. These regulations require the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, to register certain individuals in the interest of national security or law enforcement.
Although repealed, the system demonstrates the government holding xenophobic beliefs in order to emphasize the issue. Trump's travel ban elevates this policy through his distinguishment and profiling of people who are believed to pose threats. This discriminatory spotlight on people who are put under a microscope of investigation due to the place they come from demonstrates the xenophobic side of America.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Japanese Americans also face discriminatory acts and policies because of the country they or their families came from. Prior to World War II, many Japanese couldn't own land, become citizens, or vote. This exclusion was further elevated when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. Americans feared that another attack would hit the West Coast. Fueled by the public's hysteria, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president at the time, signed Executive Order 9066.
FDR declared the bombing of Pearl Harbor a date which will live in infamy. The government and the people were worried that the Japanese were still loyal to Japan and would act as spies in aid of the enemy country. They thought detainment of the Japanese would protect the West Coast. In the executive order, FDR granted his Secretary of War the power to control the relocation and regulation of Japanese Americans who were no longer deemed U.S. citizens.
Called the Instructions to All Persons of Japanese Ancestry, the sign instructs Japanese Americans on what to do before leaving for the camps. Given only 1 week before their forced removal, about 127,000 Japanese were imprisoned because of an irrational fear of invasion aided by Japanese Americans. Before the camps were built, the Japanese had to endure months of sheltering in cow sheds and horse stables before they were permanently relocated. Their permanent residents were barracks in small and hastily built secluded towns. Lawrence Kagawa, a man of Japanese descent, was one of the hundreds of thousands evacuated and wrote a famous letter to his local senator. He questioned the reason for his internment and his desire to join the military in allegiance to the U.S. Although a common everyday man, his letter signifies the confusion most Americans who were interned held. Many of them held prideful patriotic beliefs and had never stepped foot in Japan. Their families had lived in America for generations, yet white Americans considered them the enemy.
Fred Korematsu, a man of Japanese descent, went to the Supreme Court contesting the Japanese internment. Though Executive Order 9066 was extremely controversial, the Supreme Court found the order constitutional. The wartime hysteria convinced many that the detainment of the Japanese was a wartime necessity. Korematsu versus United States demonstrated an opposition in alignment with the protests following Trump's travel ban. Both caused some Americans to question the constitutionality of xenophobic actions in the executive orders.
During World War I, labor unions and strikes were on the rise. One radical labor union formed, called the Communist Labor Party. Progressives and conservatives believed that the radical group needed to be stopped. The fear of immigrants and communists was fueled when communists overthrew Russia and killed the royal family. Americans were scared that the communists would take over America as well.
This poster, Is This Tomorrow? America Under Communism, shows a flag burning and people falling under communism. Propaganda and political cartoons such as this one fueled the intense hatred of immigrants and communists. The hysteria in America spread when bombs were sent through the mail to many U.S. officials by anarchists. Dynamite was even involved in the bombing of high-up officials such as Attorney General Palmer.
When Palmer's house was bombed, he began the Palmer raids. Under the newly formed FBI, 5,000 citizens were held without legal counsel, and 249 Russian immigrants were deported. A famous case that demonstrated xenophobia during the Red Scare was the Sacco Vanzetti case. In 1921, 2 Italian immigrant anarchists and socialists were arrested for killing 2 people in a robbery. Though many protested the verdict, there was no evidence against them. Nicola Sacco and Bartolome Vanzetti were found guilty. The judge for the case was known to hate the Reds. Despite the protests, the two were executed. 4 years later, a man admitted to the crime for local gain. The hysteria of World War I and the Red Scare led to the radical hatred of Italian and Russian immigrants, as well as anarchists and communists. The book, Down with the Red Scare, describes the public sentiment towards communists, writing, "Every alien who comes to these shores and begins preaching against the United States government should be imprisoned at once." People didn't think about the immigrants' point of view or free speech. They pushed their xenophobic ideals onto everyone because of their hysteria and fear. In Trump's America, people are scared too. The recent ISIS attacks around the globe and the seemingly endless Syrian war has brought people to an all-time high in hysteria. Trump's presented a solution that would ban many immigrants from America. Though, like many people's sentiments during the Red Scare, the immigrants themselves are often not thought about in Trump's ban, their opinions and lives ignored.
One of the most long-standing examples of immigration control in the U.S. was the Chinese Exclusion Act. Set in stone in 1882, the act wasn't repealed until 1943. Fearing the Chinese were taking their jobs, many Americans confused their desire to save jobs for Americans with fear for their safety. In the opinion of the government of the United States, the coming of Chinese laborers to this country endangers the good order of certain localities within the territory. This complete banning of a whole group of people echoes modern-day xenophobic Trumpism.
Men were typically the laborers and would come to the U.S. for work and then would send money back and return to their families. The Chinese Exclusion Act banned the entrance of Chinese laborers, ending the competition for jobs. Those who wished to declare themselves non-laborers had to go through a lengthy process of reporting to the Chinese government of their desires to enter the U.S. Very few passed this process.
Although many other immigrant groups were discriminated against, the Chinese were extremely isolated from all parts of society due to a new culture, language, and customs. Americans did not accept the Chinese into the fold because they were perceived as unassimilated and thus were seen as unworthy of U.S. citizenship. Additionally, many Americans thought Chinese would be a threat to the political and social stance of America. Like Lawrence Kagawa's letter, Korematsu versus United States, and Trump's travel ban, the Chinese Exclusion Act faced opposition. The protest against the treatment of the Chinese was a demonstration of an individual's outcry against the Chinese Exclusion Act. The protest reads, "The perpetrators of these outrages do not represent the better part of the population, and it is a slander for them to claim that public sentiment justifies or approves any such violence or any such unjust and unlawful ejectment by threats and intimidation." Similarly to other points in history in the child ban, white Americans felt threatened by foreigners. Americans believe that society has changed and we're no longer xenophobic. We think that we've learned from our past, yet history seems to be repeating itself. The Chinese Exclusion Act, the Red Scare, Japanese internment, and post-9/11 reactions towards Muslims signifies some events throughout history in which the government has supported xenophobia and has taken away the rights of immigrants. Today, Trump is invoking these rights in his attempt to stop the flow of international migration. But in 1492, white Europeans were the ones praised for immigrating to America. Why does America continuously condemn the banning and mistreatment of immigrants when we are all immigrants?